Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing our series on Aristotle's Poetics. In this video, we're going to be looking at the tragic figure. Now, the second most important element of a tragedy for Aristotle is character. Aristotle outlines four important elements of a central tragic figure: goodness, having a moral motivation or goal; propriety, exemplifying virtues, remembering that virtue is very important to Aristotle's ethics; being realistic, being true to lived experience; and being consistent, noting that one may be consistently inconsistent. We talked about some issues with these four conceptions compared to our modern notions in the earlier video on the elements of tragedy. Check that out if you're interested. One can see the source of some of the neoclassical French ideas of the principles of bienséances and vraisemblance, and check out the video on unity of theater, the previous video, for more on neoclassical French theater and how they correctly drew from Aristotle and incorrectly drew from Aristotle. But all of that said, Aristotle had kind of these four principal elements of a tragic figure and what they should be. Beyond these features, though, what distinguishes tragedy from comedy is that it portrays people as better than they are. However, Aristotle notes that a good tragic figure is neither a complete villain nor a complete saint. Rather, he argues the figure should be similar to the audience, as this will make them more empathetic to their plight. This figure, however, should be of high esteem or fame, but not of too high esteem, and experience a complete reversal of fortune. This is where some of the issues of Aristotle being kind of proscriptive or just descriptive come into play. Is Aristotle really just describing the fact that all of the tragedies of his time dealt with heroes and kings and queens and these things, or is he making kind of this very normative statement that this is how tragedies should be? Characters should have what Aristotle calls hamartia, or a tragic flaw, error, or frailty. And Aristotle is famous for being the first one to really identify this as a trope or concept within plays and literature. And this trope has held through many versions of plays and many periods of literature where a character, whether they're a villain or a hero, has kind of a tragic or a fatal flaw that is their undoing. Now, there's a disagreement as to exactly what Aristotle meant by hamartia. Some claim that Aristotle thought hamartia was a small character flaw in an otherwise flawless character that leads to that character's downfall. So this is a flaw in your character. This is actually a lack of a virtue or a lack of something. So this could be pride, it could be greed, it could be lust, it could be what have you. And that flaw in their otherwise completely flawless character is the thing that leads to their downfall. Others, however, claim that hamartia is not a character failing, but a simple lack of information or error in judgment, which leads to that character's downfall. That it's not so much a lack of a virtue, but rather that they just made a mistake. They made some error in their judgment, in their rationality, or they just didn't have the right piece of information at the right time, and therefore fell. And therefore that leads to their inevitable downfall. This is a tragedy we're talking about, after all. To summarize, for Aristotle, a tragic figure is one that is great or powerful, but not so great as to be flawless or incapable of inciting empathy in the audience. They should have some hamartia or flaw either in judgment or character, and this figure should go through the course of the play from good to bad fortune as a result of that flaw or error in judgment. Now, you might think that we do not have examples of Aristotelian tragedies today. Rarely do you go to a play or a movie that is depicting someone that is great and has a great deal of power at the beginning of it, and throughout the course of it loses all of that and has a tragic reversal of fortune due to a small flaw. However, the traditional plot of many popular movies, such as the superhero movies or quote-unquote westerns, as someone like Boal might say, is of a hero that goes in the opposite direction, that goes from meager means to prosperity, not good to bad fortune, and does so because of positive traits, not because of their evil ones. And frequently, they, instead of being identified by their one flaw, a hero is identified by their one virtuous trait, whether that's their courage or their intellect or what have you, that sets them apart from everyone else around them, and that virtue, rather, is what drives them, as opposed to their fatal flaw that drives the action of the play. So it's a hero going from meager means to prosperity. It seems to be a complete reversal of Aristotle's idea of a tragedy, kind of the classic superhero movie or Western. However, these are more similar to what Aristotle's talking about than you may realize, and arguably, this is because solely of a shift in perspective. However, all that has really changed is the perspective of the story and its scope. The villain of the classic superhero movie or Western is simply the old tragic figure. They are powerful, often esteemed. Think of whether that's an evil government, an evil corporation, an evil alien overlord, what have you. They have a great deal of power. They are esteemed, and they have a great deal of virtues if they're written well. They're able to run whatever giant corporation or government that they have or army. They're able to be effective and efficient at doing that. And if they're written well, they're sympathetic to a certain degree to the audience. However, they have some tragic flaw, and that's what makes them a villain and not a hero. Whether that's greed, whether that's their pride, whether that's any number of things, whether that's what we might consider a simple flaw in their logic of believing that, wiping out half of the universe is a good thing and will be good for the world because it will deal with issues of loss and these things, that it's perhaps a flaw in their judgment, not necessarily a flaw in their character. So either an Aristotelian interpretation can be applied here to the villains of classic superhero or Western movies. And that tragic flaw, whatever it is, proves to be their downfall frequently. Whatever that flaw that they have is, proves to be their downfall. A well-written villain is like a well-written tragic figure. There's someone who we can empathize with and almost connect with, if not for whatever that tragic flaw is, whether that's distance from humanity or greed, pride, what have you. Now, this idea that Aristotle has basically kind of moved into the Aristotelian idea of a tragedy has turned into the classic superhero movie, and we've just changed our perspective of it, is not something that I've come up with, but many of theoreticians of theater have talked about and have said that this is the shift that we've undergone. It's also important to note that when talking about this, there's a change in scope. So the process of the story of a hero goes from, we see the hero in their meager beginnings, and there's this slow build as they fight through the armies of the villains or what have you. And eventually we get to this point of a climax where the villain seems to be completely all-powerful, but then the hero's able to use their tragic flaw against them, and the hero's virtue stands out in perfect contrast to that tragic flaw, and it's able to flip on its head. These tragedies, because they're not focusing on the story of the hero in that build-up, don't have that kind of broad scope. And as Aristotle said, there's a focus on the unity of action, a single specific action. So we can see that there's a focus down and a zooming in to that moment of kind of climax and reversal. That there's a zooming into the moment where the villain becomes very powerful and seems to be at the highest level of esteem and power they will be. They have their tragic flaw be their downfall. Now, this is, of course, somewhat different in the Westerns, as often it's the hero that is the one that actually causes the villain to downfall, but frequently these classic superhero movies have it be really the villain's own flaws that are their undoing. So, while it's not a perfect analog for Greek tragedy, many features of the tragic hero can be seen in today's villains. They have a fatal flaw, they go from prosperity to desolation, and are being undone by their own flaws. Looked at this way, Greek tragedies can be seen as zooming in on the single moment in between when a villain believes they have won and when they realize that their hamartia has caused them to fail, and possibly a scene of suffering in there somewhere. This cycle of reversal and recognition is going to be covered in the next video, and is Aristotle's idea about kind of the plot and the process that the characters should go through. So, that's going to be the next video, reversal and recognition, two central elements of what Aristotle said are important for a complex plot. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.